Welcome back to the Simply Wild podcast, where we come back home to the wild within us. I'm your host, Sadie Jane, and we are in the depths of my story. And I just ate some food and had a little bit of a mentee bee from putting all of this together in one place. And I just want to stop and just send out some gratitude for even having the privilege to speak my story. I'm sitting here in my office, in my home, looking at the red trees. It's fall and it's like cozy and gloomy outside. It's been raining all day and it just got more overcast. And I just feel so grateful. I just let Leo, Leo's my cat. He's a Bengal. And he's been out hunting mice probably. But he's on the chair next to me. And we're just going to dive straight in and get in more of my story. So I'm at college. And I decide to shift gears into nursing school. And I kind of talked to you guys about how I graduated before I was 20 and all those things. And I dated a lot of guys. And there are many parts of my story when I was younger that I felt a lot about why me. And as I have grown up and understood the intricacies of everything, I've said this, I'll say it again, I would not take any of it back. Okay? None of it back. And I also really, truly believe I have been so divinely guided. So divinely guided. I truly believe all of us have just without number, angels without number, ancestors, guides just guiding us and helping us. And whether that is my higher self intricately playing this role or God, right? And ascended masters and all those things. I was so divinely guided to meet my husband. It's actually insane because in my culture, in the culture of the Mormon community, you just meet people fast and you get married fast. And I think that actually can be really dangerous because you just don't know them. So I dated a lot in college and I also was like kind of over it at that point, which is so funny because I was so young, but I almost just felt mature and ready and over dating. I was going to get my bachelor's degree. I was going to say goodbye to dating men who were selling security systems with big trucks. And I was just over it. And then my roommate and I went to this event at school and I saw Jeff for the first time and I'd never seen him on campus. And I'm trying to think if I want to like share this part. We can share this part and then because Jeff's going to come on and share about his story. But I remember looking at his eyes, his blue eyes, and feeling something was different about him. And he was really, really, really shy. And of course, I did the flirting. And I'll just like kind of go quickly over the story because I think him and I can talk about the story. But at the end of the night, we ended up hanging out that night. And at the end of the night, he like walked out and was just like, I guess I'll see you on campus. And I was devastated. I'm like, he's not even asking me his number. He's not even asked for my number. I was so mortified. So I did what any strong woman would do. And I was like, why don't we just exchange numbers? And we hung out every day after that. And I cut off all other relations with all other guys. And I remember the first time he held my hand, he said, I don't just hold hands with anybody. And I'm thinking in my mind at that point, I'm like, I do hold hands with anybody. So I don't know what this means, but I was willing to commit completely to him. And we get married 7 months later from meeting each other. Now, I'll have to say this because this is a big part of my story. Even before I knew I was quote unquote rebellious or different, I was always different. when I met him, I think I had like a piece of grain in my hair or something. I had to obviously follow, there's a dress code. This is a church school. So there's a really strict dress code. So I had to follow it, but I always tried to express myself in ways that I could without getting kicked out of nursing school. So I think he kind of knew I was a little wild. But I had a picture, and I have to tell you this story because I have to paint this picture. I have to paint the picture of kind of a relationship, and the rocky start and the rocky first 13 years of our marriage, honestly. But when we first got married, this was actually before we got married, when we were dating, there was a picture of me on Facebook in a bikini on a snow machine. Now, I was never allowed to wear bikinis growing up, ever. And so when I went to college, it was like this opportunity for me to kind of express myself and see what it was that I believed. So I had this picture on Facebook on a snow machine, and somehow his parents found it. And they called Jeff up, and they're like, "You cannot marry this woman. Do not marry this woman. You do not want this woman to be the mother of your children. Do not marry her." And Jeff called and told me about this and said, "Will you please take this down? My parents are concerned. I'm concerned." And I said, "Sure, I'll take it down." I didn't really understand it that back then, but I just felt like, sure, I loved this guy so much that I was willing to do that. And it's important for you guys to know that part of the story, because that was like really the first red flag of not just a relationship, but also of the red flag of what I believed was real for me and what wasn't. And some people would call it red flag, and some people would call it a green flag. It was just a flag, a huge moment in my life where I thought, I don't think this is wrong, and people are telling me this is wrong. So what is it that I'm disconnecting here? What's the disconnect? So we get married, and we get married in the temple, and everything's great. And we wait to have sex till we're married. I was not a virgin, as we know by now with the story, but I was Jeff's first kiss. So we're just like babies. I mean, I graduated with my registered nurse degree when I was 20. A week later, I got married. And then a few weeks later, I turned 21. And right after I left nursing school, I applied to be a labor and delivery nurse, which really actually does not happen. Usually you have to do like a mom baby unit for a while or med surg for a while, because labor is considered so intense, like intensive care. It's like an ER position. Usually you have to have experience, but I had a really beautiful letter from the dean of the nursing school that just vouched for me and my adequacy. And because of that, I got this nursing job as a labor and delivery nurse, and I quickly became one of the charge nurses. So I loved it. I just poured my heart and soul into it. But it raised concerns because I was working, and now I'm married. And so now I'm supposed to have kids. And I'll say this too, for those who don't really know about this particular religion. The main emphasis for me and my story and what I learned growing up was that my main emphasis was on motherhood, getting married young, saving myself for my husband, dedicating my body to my husband, and then having babies. I can honestly say growing up, I always desired something a little different. I don't even know. I think just because I was one of the youngest in my family, and I saw my siblings with their kids, and their kids kind of like were my age. So it was like, I didn't even just have 14 kids. I had step siblings that had their younger kids that were almost my same age. And it was just so many people. And it was never like my main goal to be mother. I always wanted that in a way, but it was never my main goal. My main goal, I remember really young, I told my mom, I was like, I want to be the first woman in space. And then I remember wanting to be a reporter. I always wanted to be seen in some way. But I also remember always being taught, like, You're going to be the mother of the household. That is your goal on this earth, is to have babies and be a mother. And it just never resonated with me to the degree that helping people in a different way did. So can you tell that I'm like stressing about this part of the conversation, because this is even being brave enough to say that like wanting to be a mother wasn't my number one goal is like my heart's pounding, because I know some people love that. I know that is some people's goal, but this is the goal of Simply Wild, right? To be able to be brave enough to share our pieces and our stories and our frequencies that's true to us. So I'm not going to apologize, and I'm just going to stand in my truth of I wanted more different things. But I also knew that that was what was expected of me. And so I told myself, Jeff and I told ourselves we were going to wait a little bit, and I was just going to work. And then Jeff was still going to school. So all of my job, everything I did for work would help pay for his schooling. He didn't get a good enough grades for my parents to help with his schooling. And he also had some debt coming into the marriage of like a truck and everything. So I actually took when I got married, my parents finally gave me my 4-H money. I used to do steers in 4-H. I forgot that whole part of the story. We don't need to know every intricate detail of my childhood, but I did 4-H steers, which is like you raise steers and then you show them and then you sell them. So I had about, I think like $4,000 that my parents saved. I'm actually so glad that they didn't give it to me until I got married, because I would have spent it so easily. Anyway, they gave it to me, and then we ended up putting it towards Jeff's truck, and we just lived bare minimum because, that's just what you do when you first get married. So I was working as a nurse, and I went into the night shift immediately. And it was fine. In fact, I freaking loved it. I loved helping women. I loved being if you ask anybody that knows me well, from infancy on, I've always been in people's bubbles. I just don't understand I don't understand people's personal bubbles. I am obviously, now knowing that I'm a projector and I penetrate, I just have always been into being in people's business aggressively. So labor and delivery was the perfect place for me. And when I first got married, so remember, I'm one of the youngest of a lot of siblings. And back then, so this is in 2008, okay? This is back when blogging has just begun. So all of my siblings had blogs as their journals. This is back like Blogspot time, right? So I was like, I'm going to start a blog, and it's just going to be my journal, even though I don't have kids or anything. Like, I'll just talk about my life. And I loved it. My grammar was awful. I was a math girl. Like, I didn't know how to put together a full sentence or use there correctly, right? But I started talking about my experience as a nurse, and I started talking about funny stories as being like, a young married person with barely any money and not being able to buy cherries because they were too expensive, or just dumb stuff like that. And I loved it. I found something so therapeutic and so powerful about just sharing my life. And remember, even though I was 1 in a million growing up, I always had a desire to share my light, my voice. It was almost like I just always knew that there was something special that I needed to share with people, even though I never really felt special. Ever. I was like just another child. Not like I was never told I was special. Well, maybe I wasn't. I don't know. It just was like, it was beyond what anybody could have helped me with. It was just something within. So it felt pretty simple and easy for me to be seen in like the blogging world. And then I will never forget it. Ashley from Little Miss Mama. She is the very first blog that I saw that you could tell she was blogging for an audience that she didn't know. Because all the other blogs that I followed were people that I knew that were just documenting their photos and documenting their journals. And I was like, oh, I love following this person from high school, right? So then I saw her and I was like, oh, she's doing this for people that don't know her. And something clicked. I was like, I'm supposed to be doing that. I don't know why. but I'm supposed to be doing this. So I spent, it easily became an obsession. I spent hours in between my breaks as a nurse and when I was home, when I wasn't sleeping, reading about HTML and how to like make my title bigger, or how to put like a Google friend hangout link on the side of my blog. And I was absolutely awful at it, but we had no money to put towards making anything look any remotely even like a website. But I started posting like tutorials about how to upcycle a vintage frame from DI, because that's really all we had money to do. We never had money to put into this weird obsession of wanting to be a blogger. And the idea of not having kids for a while was short-lived. And I think it's just because I was in that environment, right? I mean, I was working as a nurse, a labor nurse in Rexburg. So there were just babies all over the place. Lots of young parents, lots of young, we were just babies having babies. And Jeff and I got pregnant pretty quickly with Reagan. And so I just started documenting my life. And things didn't really start shifting until my second baby, Baylor. And this is really where the story gets special. I had Baylor, and I'll say too, with my first two pregnancies, I was over 200 pounds, really miserable. Through both pregnancies, I worked full-time nights, and I had really big church callings. I just was completely strung out, like not working on myself, really struggling mentally, but I didn't even know what that meant. I just thought that I was just struggling, like everyone did, like every young mom did. I will say the outlet of being able to be a nurse was so healthy for me, but also so unhealthy because I was not sleeping and eating crappy food and just doing what I could. And it all came really crashing down after I had Baylor. This was in 2012. And I just had him. I was over 200 pounds, extremely, extremely unhealthy physically. And I also struggled deeply with postpartum depression. I couldn't understand why I was so sad, because I was doing everything right. I was following all the rules. I was fulfilling all the things. I was doing everything that I could. And I was miserable. And there was one night specifically when I was breastfeeding Baylor in his room, and I looked down at him and I remember thinking, you deserve better. And I remember thinking, wow, that's probably not a very healthy thought. Because what was crazy is I had a front row seat to the miracle of life every time I stepped into work. I had a front row seat to literally dimensions opened. Back then I didn't know it was considered dimensions, right? I just knew that there was a spirit world and an earthly world, and it opened up for me when I was a nurse. I got to see women in celestial glory, goddess embodied, literally birthing humans. I was a witness to otherworldly miracles, but never in my life would I've ever considered myself in the same light that I saw my patients, these women. And it clicked that night when I was like, you deserve better. I thought, why can't I get it? Why can't I see myself the way that I see these women, the way that I support these women, the way that I pray that these women feel the same? In fact, I always went with more of like holistic approach when nursing. There were always all these breadcrumbs to spirituality that I just didn't even pick up on until later in my life. But after they gave birth to their babies, most of the time they're really tired. So I would help wash them. And I just remember feeling like, I hope they can feel the love that I feel for them. I hope that they can feel it through my hands, an extension of what I hope that they see in themselves. And there was something that clicked that night when I thought, he deserves better. And then I thought to myself, I deserve better. And then I thought to myself, do you think every woman thinks about themselves this way? Every woman must think about themselves this way. And I thought, I've got to figure this out. I have to figure out a way for me to feel better mentally first. And the only way I knew at that point in my life, mental health was so far off the radar for me. The only way I knew was to lose weight. I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's figure it out. I felt like at that point, my relationship with God was just rock solid. So I was like, well, if it's not that, then it has to be my physical body because I am miserable and unhealthy. So I went extreme. And I went strict paleo, and I had been doing CrossFit for a while. I was introduced to CrossFit from my sister and her husband. When was that? Like when I was in college. So this was before in 2008, like I've always been into weightlifting and working out, but it was never in a spiritual way. It was just like, because I wanted to be skinny. So I knew that was the key. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go hardcore paleo and I'm going to go hardcore CrossFit. So I started doing that and it became my identity, my obsession. You're seeing a theme. I get a little obsessed with things. And then one night when I was on the night shift, one of the nurses was talking about this drug called phentermine. And I know it wasn't a coincidence she said that to me, because there were a couple nurses that mentioned how chubby I was. And so I was like, oh, she's telling me I should get on this drug, which is really interesting, but it's okay. It all has a purpose. But she was like, yeah, did you know this doctor can prescribe this for you? Because of course we're homies with all these doctors. I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm here for this. Now, up until this point in my life, I had never had any kind of prescription medication. And I got on phentermine and it changed my life. It was the best drug I had ever experienced. I didn't have any appetite. I had energy. I had focus. I was able to work a really long shift at night. And then I slept horribly. It was like that was the turning point of the demise of my physical body, essentially. I didn't know it because what I was doing was losing weight. And I thought that that's what mattered. I thought that that's what health was back then. So, I lost 80 pounds over about 8 months, and I started sharing it on my blog. Remember, I still have a blog. Remember, I'm talking about, at this point, I had a blog for my little daughter's hairstyles. The very first blog post that went viral for me on Pinterest was little girl hairstyles. There was like a blog post of 20 of them. If you Googled it, you'd still be able to find them. And I had like an Etsy shop with rosette headbands. I mean, I was literally doing anything to make income, honestly. And to shift just a second, I just want to talk about the income situation because we had no money. Jeff was really nervous about money. So anytime I went anywhere, if I wanted to get like a mug at TJ Maxx or something, there was just no extra money. And he'd always get really upset. No fault to him, right? But I remember thinking, not only do I desire to have income and work so that I can, everything I've always done, any kind of work that I've done is always to try to help benefit the humans, right? I always wanted to help someone. But then I also always wanted to help me. I'm like, I don't want to feel like I can't go get my nails done or go get a mug at TJ Maxx. So that was always more powerful than the negativity I got for working. And I'll get back to that because I got a lot of backlash for being a working mom. But let's go back to this health situation. So I documented this whole experience. I was working out, I was strict eating paleo, and I was on this phentermine for a while. And I started just documenting it. And all of a sudden, I was able to break the barrier between just doing crafts, which I also think is so great. No, nothing against crafts. But I was able to touch women in a way that I was touching them as a labor and delivery nurse from all around the world. So I started doing these posts, and Kristen Duke, actually, I don't think she follows me anymore because I think I'm a little too woo for her now, but her and I were good friends, and she actually approached me and said, will you make a workout program for me? And it's so cool to see these little, I'm going to say breadcrumbs again, because all these different huge moments in my business and in my life were because I was invited in to do so. And as a projector, you have to be invited in for your energy. So I got invited in to do that, and I started sharing more online. And you guys, the impact was so powerful. The women that were emailing me that had never even known how to do an air squat, that learned how to do an air squat through my blog, right? And I had a woman tell me that she had just left her abusive husband, and she was living in a motel room with her kids, and she was doing my workouts with no shoes on the motel floor. Those are the moments I cling to when I remember who I was back then, because genuinely I was doing the best I could, while also having no idea that there was more, because there's been this interesting healing evolution as I understand that in a way, I think I tricked a lot of people, because people didn't know I was on drugs, right? People didn't know I was addicted to this prescription medication. And I was losing all this weight, and I was like, let me help you do this. So of course there's that accountability story. And there's also the fact that even just by me showing up, that I was moving with my kids at home, it was changing women, and it was giving them an opportunity to work out from home. And my tagline back then was simply Sadie Jane, workouts for moms with little kids, little money, and little time. And it worked really well. I started growing in my little cute Idaho life. And, with my before and after pictures, after Baylor was born, so around 2013, I got Instagram, finally. I feel like that's pretty late for people on Instagram, but I got Instagram kind of late. And I'll never forget it. I had a before and after picture I wanted to post, and the after picture showed my stomach. And up until that point, I don't think I had a desire really to wear a bikini. I don't think it really ever came back up in our marriage. I'm trying to think. I don't think it did. But I was primary president at the time, and I was at the church actually doing some stuff. And I had just posted this picture of this before and after that I was really, really, really proud of. And I showed my stomach. And Jeff called me and was distraught. And he was like, please take that picture down. And this is when the story kind of gets sad, because this is when the loneliness really started to hit in my marriage, because I was alone for many years with the conviction of the knowing that I was not doing anything wrong. But because Jeff was the head of the household, and because I believed something different than most of my family, I was seen as the rebellious one. But he said, as the head of the household, I demand you to take it down. And I said, no, I'm not going to take down that picture. I'm not. So I didn't. And I got hundreds of messages. Thank you for this. Thank you for sharing. And I showed them to him. I was scrolling on my phone like, do you see these messages? This is good. This is good. And he was like, oh, okay. And as long as I had some kind of conviction or some kind of proof, I kind of got away with murder, is what it felt like. And that's kind of what started it for me. This idea that I have a different truth than my spouse, and I know it's not wrong. That was the moment when it really became clear that I was on this road that was not paved, this unpaved road, this new road. And I wasn't alone. In the physical realm, I was very alone. In the spiritual realm, I was being held. Now, I want to go back for a second to that first podcast where I talked about me not taking the sacrament and me quitting rodeo, because in that moment of suffering, something really miraculous happened. And the miraculous story is that I gained a relationship with Christ so powerful that he easily became my number one angel. I mean, he was with me throughout all of this. So as this is starting to unfold, I feel like I was very aware of where and how I was living and how closely I was in tune to my angels and guides, specifically Jesus Christ. And so as this continued to evolve, I remember thinking to myself, as long as I can feel my angels with me, specifically Jesus Christ, he is my homie. He is my homie. As long as I can know that is staying with me, that's all I have to remember. Because as much as I know that Jeff is my partner, I refuse to believe that I have to believe something just because he believes it. I refuse to believe that I have to just believe something because if he believes it and if I don't believe it, that is not how I do things. It's just never how I've done things. I just do not subscribe to that, right? So it kind of opened up this whole new level of not freedom really, but just like reclamation. Okay. In 2014, Jeff gets a new job in Salt Lake City. And that is important to know because that shifts everything for me. I didn't know how safe I was in Idaho, in my cute little Idaho hometown with my internet following growing. I was on Blogspot and doing like bloggy swap stories and crafts, and I was getting into the fitness thing. And then he gets a job, and we're going to have to do a whole nother podcast on how like we got into all of our homes and how guides were just literally guiding us. Like it is just it's the coolest story to see where we are now. But that's for another story. Okay. So we go to Salt Lake, we move to Salt Lake, we find a rental house, and all of a sudden I'm not quote unquote safe. I don't know if you know this, but Salt Lake is like Utah specifically is the hub for networking. At least it's the Mecca compared to Idaho, right? Networking and photo shoots. And all of a sudden I'm getting asked to do all these fitness photo shoots. All of a sudden I'm asked to collaborate. All of a sudden I'm like busy with all these events. I have these 2 little kids and everything kind of comes crashing down. I'm going to mention something really quickly too, just to add, because I think it's important to know, because it has a lot to do with my mental health and the health of my relationship with God and my family. When I was pregnant with Baylor in 2012, well, I had him in 2012. This is 2011, actually. My older brother passed away. He unalived himself. And the impact that had on my family and continues to have on my family was extremely powerful. And I think that equated a lot to my postpartum depression. And, what we could as a family to combat and to process and to heal that, which really can't be healed because you can't replace someone. His name was Brian, by the way, an incredible father and an incredible example. And I say that because I really want to paint this picture of things compounding in my life. And I didn't realize how unhealthy things got and how unhealthy things were getting. So compound that on top of, working nights, on top of new baby, postpartum depression, getting addicted to this prescription medication. And I don't know how I did it. I'm wondering, I'm trying to remember. I think I maybe, once I moved to Salt Lake, would drive up to Idaho to get this prescription because I was still on it, even though I shouldn't have been on it. And like I said, remember I lost 80 pounds and I was doing all of these things. And yet I remember preparing for a photo shoot in Salt Lake. We had just moved there and looking in the mirror and not seeing the ribs and not seeing the tiny body and not seeing the size 0 pant size. And I remember thinking, what am I going to do now? I thought if I was a size 0, I would be happy. I thought everything would be fixed. I thought everything would be easier. And I was more miserable than I had ever been. And I genuinely thought there was no way to continue on. If I can't be happy looking at myself in the mirror this way, how am I going to be happy? There was this Adidas photo shoot that I at that point had been doing a lot of sponsored content, and I was always on edge because of this secret drug addiction that I was on. And I remember wrapping myself in saran wrap before the photo shoot the night before and sleeping in it because I genuinely believed I was heavy. I genuinely looked in the mirror and saw a heavier person. I was so mentally sick. I didn't even know I was mentally sick. I want to remind you at this point in my life, so I'm 27 at this point. I was 25, 2015. Sorry. Now I'm rethinking. 2015, I was 27. At this point in my life, I had never gone to therapy. I had never done anything for my mental health. I didn't even know back then it was like, what is mental health? I knew nothing about self-love. I do believe what saved me is the endorphins of working out, for sure, and my connection to God. But everything was suffering. And the heaviness of the disconnect from my family, it was just all getting really bad. And at that point of my life, I was feeling really bitter about pretty much everything in my life. We were renting this tiny home in Salt Lake, and I remember feeling so bitter because my parents wouldn't help us. Like, my parents have all this money and they're not helping us. And our basement's flooded with sewer, and there's poop floating in the floor, and there's hobos everywhere, and there's mice in the walls. And I was so mad. I was just so mad. And the one thing that I could control, the skinniness of my body, wasn't making me happy. And I remember calling up my sister one day and saying, Liza, I am not okay. I'm not okay. Honestly, at that point in my life, the only dopamine I had was the comments on Instagram about how skinny and how fit I was. And she got off the phone with me, and she could feel the darkness in my voice and the helplessness and hopelessness. And she tells the story really beautifully. I actually would love to have her as a guest as well, because she's a hypnotherapist now. But she went to a girls' night that night, she says in the story. And she was telling her friends, she's like, my sister's struggling and I don't know how to help her. And one of her friends said, Liza, I am in school to become a hypnotherapist by this guy named Dennis Parker, who is in Farmington, Utah. And the way that this girl found Dennis Parker was she was literally kneeling on the side of her bed praying, please help me find a therapist to work with. Please help me find something. And the name Dennis Parker popped into her head, and she Googled it, and it was this hypnotherapist. So Liza at that point had never heard of hypnotherapy either. She was a social worker by then? I think so. My sister was. So she calls me back and she goes, Sadie, listen, I know this is going to sound weird, but I just feel like you should try this. And I promise you, nothing has ever felt more correct. Okay, I have to jump back a second because I missed a really important part of this. So we had been in Utah at this point for just a couple months. Like, things were like crashing quick. when I moved here. But what was cool about moving to Utah was that I found I was able to be a part of a gym. Now in Idaho, I couldn't because I wasn't close enough to town. I did all my workouts at home. But this time I could be a part of a gym, and in the gym had yoga. You guys. So within the first couple weeks of this, within the first couple months of being in Utah, I found hypnotherapy and yoga. So let me tell you about the yoga story first. So I walk into my yoga class, and what happened was, you're on your yoga mat and you're not allowed to leave. And all of a sudden you're stretching and you're feeling and you're sweating and you're feeling, and you can't go anywhere. Like you can't run away from your feelings. And I can't even tell you how much I bawled and bawled and bawled that first yoga class. And I was like, oh, this is yoga. Like I can't run away from my feelings. Oh, these feelings that are being removed from this yin postures and these holds and this fluidity in my body and this emotional charge that's happening through the sound and the music and the lights and what the teacher is saying. And it really started changing me. Okay. And within that same, I want to say it was within the same week, my sister called me about this. So I look up Dennis Parker, and I go and get an appointment with him. And I had never been to therapy before this, okay? Never once, not even thought about it. It was just not something we did. So I go to this hypnotherapy session, and he gives me an explanation of what it is. And at that point, truly, I had no idea what even therapy was. And I can't even tell you how powerful that session was, because in that session, for the first time in my entire life, not only did I feel hope, but I learned that I can heal myself. So what happens is in hypnotherapy, your conscious mind, which is your mind out here. Your conscious mind is the mind that can literally like look at your hand and tell you all the different wrinkles in your hands. Your subconscious mind is what can tell you your address to your house, right? So he was facilitating this experience where I went down to a hypnosis state in between wake and rest, right? In between wake and REM. And he facilitated this experience where I was able to go back into my brain, back into my repressed thoughts, back into my repressed feelings. And my conscious self, my present self, was able to heal that experience. Because this is long form podcast style, I'm going to tell you about the whole hypno session because I think that's important. I've never been able to really tell the whole thing because I've always had it's always just been like time constraint, but I'm going to tell it now. I had a whole long list of things that I wanted to process. I mean, remember at this point, I hadn't even processed anything. So it was interesting the way that he formulated the hypnotherapy session, because there's many ways you can do it. And just like a spoiler alert, I became a hypnotherapist through him. I took his classes before he passed. He's now passed. But he left a legacy. And my sister Liza is also, she's a clinical hypnotherapist, and just absolutely exceptional. But what happened is he had me settle my body and relax my body. And then he had me count down from 10 to 1. And as I was counting down, well, first he counted down from 10 to 1 to relax my body. And then he counted down from 10 to 1, and I was to find the first emotion that popped up. Okay. The first emotion was sadness, and I was pissed about it. Like, really? Sadness? This is so annoying. And then he said, I want you to go. And then he obviously counted down again. And he said, I want you to go to the first time you felt sadness in your life. And the more he counted down, the more crisp the walls looked. I was literally teleported to the first time in my mind that I felt sadness. Maybe not even the first time, just the most potent time, right? The most relevant time the time that needed to heal the most. So every time he counted down the smell, like I could smell the way that the situation I was in smelled. I could see the mirrors in the closet. I could see the sweaters in the closet. I could see my dad. I could see where I was at. And I was teleported genuinely to when my dad was packing his bags to leave our family. I don't know if it was to leave on a trip, but my little brain as a child remembered that as like a time he left. It could very well have been when he left our family for good, right? So, which would have been around when I was 3. So I was watching this happen and I was seeing the sadness on my face, but it wasn't just sadness. It was this heaviness that I had caused him to leave. And I remember looking at him through the lens of my 3-year-old self. My 3-year-old self could see him, and what she saw was like hatred and devastation, and you're not good enough to stay. This is your fault, Sadie. This is what my 3-year-old brain had created. This is the story she had created. And I remember packing like a little drawing or something in his bag, hoping that he would find it. And then Dennis is holding space for me and cueing me into these different prompts. And so now he prompts me as an adult, as a 27-year-old woman. He says, now what do you see? What do you see that he is? And all I could see was, and of course, I completely break down and I see this man who is torn between 2 worlds, who has an impossible decision, who is hurting, who is broken, and who doesn't realize the impact of what he's doing to this child, right? And it all starts making sense that it's not my fault that my dad leaves. That's not my fault that my dad left all of us, right? So then I am able to go over to her and kneel down and grab her shoulders and look at her in the eyes and say, baby Sadie, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that he left. It's not your fault that he's hurting. You can't do anything to help it. But it's going to be okay. And I'm realizing in that moment that this is why I have moments in my childhood that I can't remember, because I had blocked him out. Because how painful is it to believe that you're in charge of, your first moment of sadness, your first memory of sadness is that somebody left because of you. And it's all intertwined and tangled into my self-worth, right? So then he puts me on my right knee and he puts my dad on my right knee and me on my left knee. And he does this really beautiful closing practice where all of a sudden it's like I'm trying to explain my first experience without trying to explain too much hypnotherapy, because as a hypnotherapist, I want you to explain the science, but it's like the last bottom pearl on the string of pearls, and you let it go, and then all of the pearls fall, right? It's like you heal that first moment, the first imprinting moment of that emotion, because that emotion of sadness had the entanglement and I don't want to use the word label, but we'll use the word label, the label of worthiness. So every time I felt sad, there was a layer of unworthiness. There was a layer of it's your fault. There was a layer of this guilt, right? Tied to this emotion that really sadness, the emotion of sadness, is a beautiful emotion. So as I reclaim and I talk to my younger self and I tell her, this isn't your fault. You're safe to feel sad. This is what happened. This is really what transpired from an adult view, from my older self. It was like I was watching, those old telephone number flippy through things. It was like I was flipping through all the times I felt sadness in my childhood. And it was like, it was healing pieces of that. It was like all of a sudden I could feel emotion and I could feel sadness, and I didn't have to repress those memories of sadness. I didn't have to label them as guilt or shame or disgust, right? And it changed everything. That's why hypnotherapy is so powerful and potent, because it goes to the root of things. You're not just talking about things. So between that and yoga, my mind was blown. I had thought, first of all, I was doing the best I could. When I worked out, dopamine would hit and it really helped, which is why I knew I had to get it into the hands of women. I genuinely believed it was the foundation of everything. Little did I know, the foundation was actually within me. It's a huge piece. Physicality, the somatics, right? The somatics of our physical body it's so essential. I had no idea this piece existed. I had always been told I was a daughter of God, always. I never really believed it. I never really understood what that meant. I never really understood what that meant until now. And in fact, I was also always taught this idea that we're God's and that we're on this earth to understand like really what it means to feel human and feel all this variety of emotions. And that was when it really clicked, like, oh, I have this God embodied within me. This changes everything. It brings a whole layer of sovereignty, of freedom within myself that I just didn't even know existed. So, like I do with everything, it just changed everything. I started reading every Brene Brown book, every Gabby Bernstein book. I became yoga teacher certified. I started taking hypnotherapy classes to become a hypnotherapist. I took meditation workshops and meditation certifications. And I went back to Dennis again and again and again and healed my body dysmorphia. And I had a really, really powerful session with him all about my stepfather, my dad, and my mom, and how they were just doing the best they could. And it's changed everything because it's forced me to really be accountable for my relationship with them. And I'm so, so grateful it did, because I'm really grateful for our relationship that we have. Anyway, while this is all happening, Jeff is like, who the hell are you? He's so confused. He's so worried. He has no idea who I am or what I'm up to. And we start kind of going like this. We start going like this more and more. This is in, if you're not watching the video, we start separating more and more. We just genuinely, I feel like we were planted in different pots. I don't even know if we were ever really planted in the same pot, because I actually think the impact of him asking me to take down the bikini photo before we were married was way more impactful than I realized, because it was a theme throughout our marriage, especially when I started losing weight and when I started wearing tank tops to the gym or like sports bras. I didn't realize how impactful that was going to be for me, because I genuinely believed, and still to this day believe, it is not wrong. But it was so potent at that time. Along that same time, I had other members of other parts of the family being very judgmental. Remember how I said I'm going to talk about this in a way that's like constructive and accountable? I want to just tell this one story. Well, I'm going to tell two stories, because it's been really interesting to see this evolution. When I started posting more about the spirituality space, and that was really the epiphany for me of self-love. This is where self-love became a thing for me. And this was before self-love was even a thing. Me and Sarah, Bird's Papaya, started this self-love journey together. We were really, really skinny together. I remember her and I texting back and forth. We were really, really great friends. And then we kind of found this idea of self-love together, which was really rad. Everybody knows the Bird's Papaya. I don't even have to introduce her. But I remember posting more about my sports bras and stuff. And there was a colleague of mine, one of my best friends from nursing school. And she emailed me and said, how dare you claim that you're part of the LDS church with how you're posting online? How dare you? Like, I have to unfollow you. And that is one of many examples of judgments that I got. And guess where I got them? All from people I knew. All from people I knew. People have been really, really gruesome to me on this whole journey. And I didn't share this part. Sounds about right. This sounds about a good place to talk about it. I wasn't just being made fun of or judged for the fact that I was talking about spirituality now, or yoga, or hypnotherapy, or showing my stomach. I mean, I was judged and ridiculed and made fun of for even having a blog. And I mean, rightfully so. I was doing like yoga poses in the middle of the road. It was not good, you guys. You can go look into my blog archives or my YouTube. It was just not good. I was embarrassing. It was so embarrassing. But I stuck with it. There was something inside me that I knew I had to just keep going. And I was alone for a lot of it. I mean, I had aunts and uncles making fun of me. I had Jeff's family was judging me and making fun of me behind the scenes. And it was really painful. I won't say I didn't judge them back, because I absolutely judged them back, but I never responded with hate to them, ever. I never approached them about it. I never talked to them about it. I never called them and hatefully talked to them. I'm all over the place with this, but just follow me, because there's like stories now I'm remembering that I feel like are important to share. When I very first, I'll never forget it. It was when I was working nights. I had 2 kids, and I had a conversation with a person close to me. And she said to me, I was telling her how embarrassing it was because Jeff was supposed to drop the kids off at a friend's house because I was supposed to sleep. And she goes, well, Sadie, that's not his job. That's your job. Like, you're supposed to be the mom. You're supposed to be working from home. Like, you're not even supposed to be working. What are you doing? Like, you're the mom. Of course, Reagan's nose is going to be gross. And I remember saying, are you serious? She goes, yeah. What are you doing working outside the home? So this kind of continued, this idea of people just judging me. But there was always, first of all, remember, Jesus is always on my side, and I have all these angels and guides watching me. There was always this understanding that I knew that people were just meeting me where they could meet themselves. For some reason, somehow they believed that they were right, and they were only judging me from their seat, from where they could see. So that helped me. And then I always kept Christ consciousness. I didn't know it was called Christ consciousness at the time, but this concept of understanding who Christ is and what he embodies, that's truly what helped me get through all this. And then the tip of the iceberg, and I'll say this, Jeff will have a chance to come on and share his magic, because like I said, I wouldn't take any of this back. Jeff didn't know what to do with all of this, and he didn't defend me in a lot of this, which is actually okay. I'm so grateful it panned out the way it did, because I'm just grateful we didn't do anything out of bitterness and hate, because I think it saved our relationship with these people. But there was, when all this was kind of going down, and granted, none of this addiction stuff was out in the public, but this was around the same time hypnotherapy came out in yoga, right? Now, so now we're in that timeline again. I got an email from a family member's visiting teaching companion. So just a person from their town, a town from this person's town. And she was like, I'm really worried about you, and I'm disappointed in you, and I think that you're a bad example to your daughter. And then she goes on to say, I used to be a rebellious child too. I know what you did in high school. I know you weren't a virgin. And I I have now turned myself to God, and I think you should do the same. And if you need help, let me know. Okay, cool. So that one really made me spiral because it was clear that these people were talking about me in the town. And it was in that moment that Jeff started to see a pattern and reached out to this person and said, please let us live our life. That was when we really started bringing boundaries into our relationships. And everything kind of shifted around that time. Everything was just kind of revealing itself. And I only share those stories because genuinely, every single time I was made fun of or judged or reprimanded or emailed or talked about behind my back, it gave me an opportunity to really sink into my truth. And instead of wasting my energy and my time trying to prove to them who I was or what my beliefs were, I used it to fuel myself to understand what I believed. Because with all this new awakening and all this new spirituality and all this new light, everything was shifting and changing for me. Literally everything. And I am so grateful for every single time I was judged or pressured, or every time I was alone, because it has proven time and time again that if I meet that judgment with love, with Christ consciousness, I can dig my truth so much deeper and so much deeper, and take that energy and put it towards bettering myself rather than trying to convince these people that don't want to know about my views and don't really care anyway about who I am. It's been wild to see. That was the beginning of my spiritual awakening journey. Okay. When all this kind of happened. So before people were judging me about showing my stomach, people were judging me about being online. It was confusing to a lot of people, which actually I don't. None of this, by the way, I blame on anybody, because it is weird to want to share everything online. It is weird to want to take pictures of yourself, especially back then. It is weird for some people who have grown up to believe that modesty includes covering your stomach, to believe it's okay to show your stomach. Like, I get it. I get it. I get it now more than ever. Back then, I'm not kidding. Not only did the angels literally have my back for helping me find Jeff, but also they always carried me, because I could have really burnt a lot of bridges. And instead of now having to burn bridges, now I get to hold boundaries. And I have boundaries with these people. And all I've ever done is love, 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 and love. And it's honestly caused such a glitch in the matrix. Like, people are glitching. Like, why isn't she fighting back? Why isn't she judging back? Why isn't she fighting back? No, I refuse. Okay, so that was like a super, super long tangent. I think this is where we're going to stop for now. Part 2, 1 hour and 11 minutes long. Wow, that was kind of heavy. I love you all. Remember to do something today that helps you anchor in the wildness within you. What are you going to do today to help you find your own wild? I love you so much. Come back for part 3 of the story of Simply Sadie Jane. I'm going to wait until this hits 11:11. I love you so much. Don't ever be afraid to find your own frequency. Oh my gosh, it's not here yet. This would have been really cool if it was just organically that way. Everything always works out for you. Never, ever, ever forget that.